Later, Total Control.
Tonight, early morning chaos after a four-wheel drive ploughs into Darwin's main party strip, leaving a man in hospital. Also tonight, 2 international passengers breach COVID rules, triggering a health emergency across 2 states. Looking back at the biggest crimes to rock the territory as the NT Police Force clocks up a milestone. And from an asteroid to the outback, Japanese scientists pull off an extraordinary mission to outer space and back again. Good evening, Laetitia Lemke with ABC News. 3 men are in police custody after a car smashed into a bar in downtown Darwin following an alleged assault at the popular nightclub strip. Police say investigations are continuing, including into whether the crash was part of a revenge attack. And a warning, this story contains vision that may be distressing to some viewers.
In the small hours of Sunday morning, a four-wheel drive is being driven at a startling speed, straight towards a group of people outside Six Tanks, a licensed premises on Mitchell Street, which was closed at the time of the incident. After the crash, the driver appears to become the victim of more violence.
So I just saw people fighting outside, and then I came to just check what's happening. And then the car just came out of nowhere and just rammed inside.
The vehicle struck a 25-year-old man who was taken to hospital with back and leg injuries. He remains in a stable condition and is in police custody. Police are now reviewing CCTV in the area to verify whether the 38-year-old driver, who is also in police custody, was driving towards someone who assaulted him earlier in the night. A 36-year-old has also been held by police over the incident.
We believe that the driver and the group, including the 25-year-old male, had been involved in an early interaction which the driver was assaulted.
It was here on Darwin's popular party strip where police allege the violence began. Since the early morning carnage, which led to 3 people being kept in custody, one of those in hospital, the area has been cleaned up and revellers are heading back out into the fray. Police say while no charges have yet been laid, their focus now is to go through as much evidence as possible for what is shaping up to be a large investigation.
We can't speculate on any motive right now. The scale of the investigation is, as you can imagine, quite large. There's a large amount of witnesses involved.
Remnants of a chaotic scene hauled away into police hands. Diana Damjanovic, ABC News.
Police in New South Wales have accepted the blame for a quarantine bungle which has thrown more than 180 people into home isolation in Victoria. The 2 German nationals arrived in Sydney yesterday and managed to get on a flight to Melbourne without the mandatory 2 weeks in hotel quarantine. They've tested negative, but the mistake was only picked up in Melbourne by a security guard.
Melbourne isn't taking international passengers yet, but yesterday 2 slipped through the net.
They are the first, albeit inadvertent, occupants of Victoria's reset hotel quarantine system.
New South Wales Police has taken the blame.
There was a language barrier, there was communication issues, and the police officer has admitted the mistake that he didn't check the appropriate exemption forms and the paperwork appropriately.
The 2 passengers left Germany, flying via Japan, landing in Sydney yesterday morning. All passengers arriving at Australia's international airports are first cleared by Australian Border Force as part of normal immigration procedures. They then become the responsibility of state authorities. Passengers are given an initial temperature screening by state health officials, collect their baggage and are directed by police to board a bus for hotel quarantine. But in this case, the 2 passengers were allowed to transfer to the domestic terminal to board the Virgin flight to Melbourne. Once they arrived here in Melbourne, an airport security guard noticed them looking lost and asked if they needed some help. He says they told him they'd just arrived from Germany and were looking for hotel quarantine. The security guard, who was wearing a mask, made sure the new arrivals were kept outside, away from other passengers, and notified his manager of the breach.
When that person became aware that this was not as it should be, something was wrong here, they've acted promptly and we're very grateful to them. Very, very, very grateful to them.
There are multiple rings of containment within the quarantine and border system, and ultimately these passengers have been picked up within those rings of containment.
Last night, the other 174 people on the flight received this text message notifying them they might have been exposed to COVID-19. They're in home isolation. The international arrivals are in hotel quarantine.
Something's gone wrong in New South Wales. Let's get to the bottom of that, and then hopefully that won't happen again, and every state can benefit from that.
The pair will be tested again tomorrow. Margaret Paul, ABC News, Melbourne.
Despite the breach, COVID restrictions in Victoria have been further eased. From midnight tonight, masks will only be required in supermarkets, department stores, indoor markets and on public transport. And residents will be able to have 30 visitors in their home and outdoor gatherings of up to 100.
5 months after going into lockdown, Victorians are breathing a sigh of relief.
What this signifies today is that we have built something that's precious. We have built something that is internationally unique.
From tomorrow, face masks will only be required in shopping centres, retail stores, indoor markets, on public transport, taxis and ride-sharing services. Melbourne Airport has also mandated mask wearing. Despite the easing, Victorians are being told to carry a mask at all times.
We'll have another look at this into January and see whether those rules can change, but it's a very low cost for a very high benefit.
Victorians will also be able to host up to 30 people in their homes, while outdoor gatherings in public places have increased to 100 people. Many Victorians will be celebrating their newfound freedoms with a drink, and they'll finally be allowed to do that standing at the bar.
Everyone's done the right thing, and it's really rewarding after such a long year to sort of, be able to finish it with friends, family and good times.
The cap on patron numbers in hospitality venues will be removed, but they'll need to abide by a 1 person per 2 square metres limit. Guest limits at weddings, funerals and religious gatherings have also been scrapped, but people will still miss out on attending important life events.
A lot of families are disappointed, thinking they can have an endless number of people now with them, but that actually isn't the case because of the square meterage that applies to the cemetery chapels around Melbourne.
Reception centres are already receiving bookings now that restrictions have relaxed.
The last 9 months we haven't had an event, and with today's announcement with the 2 square metre rule, we can have actually an event which is actually viable, which is fantastic.
Victorian businesses have been struggling behind their counterparts in other states for months and months. These changes should have been in place some time ago. Better late than never, but a lot of small businesses have done it so tough.
More workers will be returning to the office this summer, with up to 50% allowed on site by the 11th of January. The public service will also begin returning to the office by mid-January. Despite 37 days straight of no new cases, this new level of restrictions is likely to be in place for some time.
Whether it's 5 days, 15 days, 50 days with no cases, that's not the same as having a vaccine.
But for now, Victorians can enjoy more freedoms which were once taken for granted. Yvette Gray, ABC News, Melbourne.
Less than 2 months since the NT began taking repatriation flights from overseas, other states have begun following suit. Tasmania's first repatriation flight from India has arrived in Hobart. It's brought vulnerable Australian citizens home who've been caught out overseas during the COVID crisis.
After a 12-hour journey from India, Tasmania's first international repatriation flight has touched down in Hobart. On board are 118 passengers from Delhi, including 36 children.
It's very good to be involved in an operation that has national significance. We've been bringing people back that are vulnerable. They're Australian citizens that have been caught out overseas.
The arrivals will spend 2 weeks in hotel quarantine, supervised by police and Australian Defence Force personnel from Townsville, as well as private security guards. They'll be regularly tested for COVID-19 and only be allowed into the community after returning a negative result.
Last week, a Sydney hotel quarantine worker was diagnosed with COVID-19, raising concerns the virus would spread after she worked at a second hotel. The Tasmanian government wants to reduce the risk of that happening here and has announced it will supplement the wages of part-time hotel quarantine workers to full-time rates and give workers an extra allowance. It's hoped that will reduce their need to work second jobs.
What we are absolutely determined to do is to make sure that people in Tasmania are safe.
It does seem the government stepped up. They've learnt from other jurisdictions. They've put in place much better protections for Tasmanians in the broader community, but also the workers who will be dealing directly with these travellers.
Unions have also welcomed the extra wages, but say the devil is in the detail.
This needs to be done in a way that will ensure the supplements are properly passed on to workers and not just pocketed by contractors.
More Mercy flights are planned. About 450 Australian citizens are expected to be flown into Tasmania from overseas between now and the end of January. Fiona Blackwood, ABC News.
The Governor-General has warned the military's next generation of leaders will need to rebuild relations with the public following the Afghanistan war crimes report. Retired General David Hurley, who led the Defence Force during the conflict, is now facing the prospect of having to revoke honours for many who served under him.
The proudest of military moments. Graduation day at the Australian Defence Force Academy, and the Commander-in-Chief's on hand to review the ADF's next generation of leaders. In front of a scaled-back, socially distanced crowd, Governor-General David Hurley acknowledged the tough times.
It's been a particularly difficult year, we know, COVID-19.
But 2020 has forced a more daunting challenge on these young graduates, dealing with the legacy of last month's explosive Afghanistan war crimes report.
You are extremely well equipped to make an important contribution to your country, while reassuring and reaffirming its relationship with the Australian people following the findings of the Brereton inquiry.
General Hurley's tenure as Defence Chief coincided with some of the worst alleged crimes committed by Australian Special Forces in Afghanistan. Veterans of the 12-year conflict are furious no senior officer has yet faced any consequences for their leadership failures.
I feel a lot of senior leaders are now coming out and stamping on a fire that's been out for over 7 years and kicking dirt over the new generation that are coming through.
Leadership is not easy. I think you've learned that by now. You'll have to make decisions that have consequences for people and often make those decisions under pressure.
The Defence Force's current leadership is feeling the pressure from its political masters, particularly over the Prime Minister's push to stop a meritorious unit citation being stripped from Afghanistan veterans. Any recommendation to revoke the honour will ultimately go to the Governor-General. Not that he's giving anything away about his own views.
Bringing the Australian people along with the ADF will be an enormous part of your work in the future.
And ensuring the troops are properly in line. Andrew Green, ABC News, Canberra.
Last night's rendition of the Australian anthem in Indigenous language before the Wallabies Argentina test has sparked calls for other sporting codes to follow suit. The anthem, sung in both Eora language and English by a 17-year-old Wiradjuri woman, has been widely celebrated as a step forward for the nation.
A contemporary performance in an ancient language. For many watching on, this was a moment to be proud of. As an emotional team united behind a young Aboriginal woman.
As soon as I stepped onto the field, I was just overwhelmed with pride and joy.
For Wiradjuri teenager and high school student Olivia Fox, it was a moment worth relishing.
I didn't realise it would have such a big impact. You know, I woke up this morning with hundreds of comments on videos and it was just, it's insane, honestly.
It's just so important, I think, for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people just to be able to embrace that and hear that sung at such an important sporting event.
And embrace it they did. Indigenous and non-Indigenous sports stars praised the dual anthem, describing it as a leap forward for a country on the right track and that it should be made permanent. Former Indigenous Wallaby Kurtley Beale also showed his support.
We were practicing it during the week
and our guys it was never a question. We're very proud to have that opportunity to do it, and I think it sounded pretty good too.
But in a now deleted post, NRL star Latrell Mitchell suggested singing Advance Australia Fair in language doesn't fix the problems inherent in its lyrics.
Everyone has their own opinion on everything. You know, I don't take it to heart. I'm just so proud to be able to sing it.
While it was a first for Australia, other countries like New Zealand and South Africa have long sought to unite their people through the national song. It comes as other Australian sporting codes work out how best to take a stand to recognise First Nations culture.
So this is the start of probably a long process.
Singing the national anthem in an Aboriginal language is a step in the right direction. It is only the beginning of a process, but this is the first time at an international game that it's been spoken and sung in such a way, and I think that's really important.
A new sound for an anthem which could become the benchmark for the nation. Tom Maddox, ABC News.
The race is on for Australia's farming industry to secure more workers, with employee shortages expected to peak next year. While the farming workforce has traditionally been made up of people on visas, in the Northern Territory there's been a major effort to encourage locals into the industry.
A couple more days, they'll be ready.
Francis and Gopal are learning tricks of the trade. The two arrived in Australia as refugees more than 4 years ago, and after struggling to find consistent employment, picking mangoes on a Darwin farm has helped them build for the future.
Just want to work hard, save our money, get a job, a house.
Traditionally, farmers have hired backpackers and Pacific Islanders for seasonal work, and locals have steered away from working in the tough conditions. With restrictions placed on international arrivals affecting businesses, it's forced some of the locally unemployed to consider agricultural work.
Full-time hours on average is about 47 hours at the moment, where we've seen a decrease across accommodation and food services and retail by 2 to 5% in the last 5 years.
The massive shortage of seasonal workers is expected to reach its peak next year.
And we've got a glut of French and British and Spanish backpackers at the moment. They're slowly going home, and none are coming back. And so the real problem I see is next season.
But there's also been reports farmers were rejecting local applicants.
We've had a story yesterday shared with us that someone had applied for about 100 farm labour jobs, had not heard back from most people, and the ones that they did hear back from said that they don't hire Australian workers.
In the Northern Territory, it appears a concerted effort to get locals into agricultural jobs is paying off.
We've certainly worked with organisations like Melaleuca Refugee Centre, so we've got a lot of refugees out in the field now working. We've worked with the university around trying to get students picking fruit. We've done an extensive campaign with trying to attract local people. We've seen nationally the numbers decline actually for farm workers by 3.9% across the whole country more broadly. But there's areas in Victoria and the Northern Territory where they're bucking that trend.
Max Solutions says over the last year, more than double the number of Australian citizens or permanent residents have accepted agricultural, forestry and fishery jobs in the NT compared to 2019. And while that's good news, efforts to entice more people into that field of work will need to continue well into next year to ensure a consistent workforce while international borders remain closed.
We know that workforce is going to be evolving. As an organisation, as an industry, we've got some work to do to make sure that we're ready for that.
A step in the right direction. Suwaiba Hanifi, ABC News.
The federal government could soon be embroiled in a fresh fight with China over an infrastructure deal struck between Victoria and Beijing 2 years ago. The Belt and Road Agreement is shaping up to be the next big test in the relationship, with Parliament on the verge of passing new laws giving the Commonwealth the right to veto deals done with foreign powers. Here's political reporter Jane Norman.
A modern-day version of the ancient Silk Road.
The belt connects to land, the road moves on the sea.
China's ambitious project of the century to build railways, ports, pipelines and power networks across the globe.
The Belt and Road is how
including here in Australia.
It's in our interest to make sure that we're sending more product, not less, to our biggest customer.
Victoria's the only state to have signed up, but the agreement might be short-lived. When new laws come into force this week, the Commonwealth will have sweeping powers to scuttle deals struck with foreign governments.
We have said we would not sign up to the BRI.
Federally, both major parties are opposed to the Belt and Road Initiative, fearing it's really about the superpowers' push to spread its influence. But Labor is urging caution.
China will observe how this is handled carefully.
Scrapping the deal risks a fresh brawl with Beijing, just as the diplomatic relationship plunges to new lows. An offensive tweet posted by a Chinese official last week prompting this uncharacteristically furious response.
The Chinese government should be totally ashamed of this post.
It is a big call to go directly, escalate directly to the national leader.
Penny Wong joined the condemnation of China, but believes it could have been handled better.
I hope that Scott Morrison thought very carefully about that decision.
Our relationship with China is not in a good place at the moment, and it's in all of our interests to try and find a reset.
Tearing up Victoria's Belt and Road Agreement with Beijing certainly would not help with any reset. But the deal struck in 2018 was a motivating factor behind these new foreign relations laws, and the Morrison government is determined to scuttle it. The Prime Minister might bide his time given the fraught state of the diplomatic relationship, but it's likely a question of when, not if, it'll happen. Jane Norman, ABC News, Canberra.
Australia's economic resilience over the last few decades has hinged on China's extraordinary growth. Following a slight downturn when coronavirus first emerged in Wuhan, Beijing's economy is now back to where it was. And as Alan Kohler explains, the opportunity is again there for the taking.
It's now been 12 months since the first coronavirus case was detected in Wuhan, China. And as a horrible year limps to a close, the clear winner of the pandemic is China. China locked down first and hardest. Who can forget the images of apartment building doors being sealed shut? So while Europe and America are grappling with another wave and millions of cases and hundreds of thousands of deaths, China, with the largest population on Earth, barely had a first wave and now has among the least cases. And the result is that China's economy is by far the world's strongest. China's recovery has been the very definition of V-shaped. Likewise, retail sales. And electricity production has just kept powering ahead. Normally, this would be good news for Australia. Our economy is in sync with China's because it's by far our biggest customer for exports, ranging from iron ore and wine to education and tourism. When they win, so do we, or at least that's normally the situation. But at the same time as winning the pandemic economically, China is throwing its weight around and making an example of Australia. As a result, Australia's exporters need to start looking for other markets. And with goods exports, that shouldn't be too hard. Unless Chinese people stop drinking beer and wine, they'll need to buy barley and wine from somewhere. Australia's producers should be able to fill whatever supply gap that creates. The problem could be with services exports, tourism and education. And the hope is that with so few cases here, Australia could be seen as a safe place to study and visit. But vaccines could put paid to that distinction.
US President Donald Trump has told supporters in Georgia that he's never lost an election. At his first rally since he was defeated by Joe Biden, the president repeated claims of widespread fraud, still without evidence.
And I have to say, if I lost, I'd be a very gracious loser. If I lost, I would say I lost, and I'd go to Florida, and I'd take it easy, and I'd go around, and I'd say I did a good job. But you can't ever accept when they steal and rig and rob. Can't accept it.
He was campaigning for two Republicans in next month's critical Senate runoff election, which will decide control of the upper house. Mass vaccinations are underway in Russia. 70 clinics have opened in Moscow this weekend. The Sputnik vaccine was registered in August, drawing international criticism from scientists who questioned its safety, given the speed of development. Thousands of people enrolled to receive the jabs within hours of the clinic's opening. Those with higher risk of exposure are being given priority. Sputnik's developers say it is 95% effective and causes no major side effects, although there are concerns its rapid deployment means it hasn't been tested thoroughly enough. Russia reported nearly 29,000 new cases on Saturday, its highest daily toll of the pandemic. Britain and the European Union say significant differences remain on their post-Brexit trade deal as the deadline looms for the agreement. Talks have continued this weekend, but the UK Cabinet say they will back a no-deal outcome if Prime Minister Boris Johnson decides that's necessary when the Brexit transition period ends on December 31. Violent clashes have erupted in Paris for a second weekend. Hooded anarchists broke away from a peaceful protest to smash shopfronts, torch cars and burn barricades. They are protesting against a new security bill. Under the proposed law, it would be a crime to share images of security forces on social media, which protesters say will cover up police abuse. Outback murders, a mass shooting, the disappearance of a baby girl. When the Northern Territory is the focus of the world's attention, it's usually its police force on the front line answering questions. 2020 marked 150 years for the Northern Territory Police. Melissa McKay takes a look at some of the force's major investigations and some of its biggest blunders. And a warning, this story contains images of Aboriginal people who are now deceased.
The infant girl, Azaria Chamberlain, vanished. Some said she was taken by a dingo. Some said she wasn't.
For decades, the disappearance of a 9-week-old baby girl dominated the headlines.
From all over Australia, journalists trooped up to Alice Springs.
One of Australia's most iconic sites, suddenly the scene of what was thought to be a horrific crime. Police spent years searching for the answer to the question, what happened to Azaria Chamberlain?
There was no biology and none of the analytical aspects which people accept as, know about the DNA aspects that they do today. So that's a very different landscape and to how it's developed now.
In 1982, a jury found Lindy Chamberlain guilty of her daughter's murder, but when Azaria's clothes were found near Uluru in 1986, the conviction was quashed. The mistakes that put Chamberlain and her husband behind bars forced Territory Police to improve their forensic capabilities.
We didn't have a full-scale integrated forensic science service in the Northern Territory. We had fingerprint expertise and we had some firearms examination or ballistics expertise. That was it.
Despite its small and sparse population, Central Australia has been the scene of many of the Northern Territory's major investigations. Just 3 years after Azaria Chamberlain disappeared, Douglas Crabb committed one of the NT's worst mass murders, driving his truck into the inland motel and killing 5 people.
During the incident, a semi-trailer crashed through a bar wall, pinning between 15 and 20 people beneath it.
Now aged in his 70s, Crabb remains behind bars in Western Australia. In the early 2000s, it was a remote part of the Northern Territory, again the centre of the world's attention.
Peter Falconio was shot dead. Joanne Lees managed to escape, hiding for hours in the desert.
Inexperienced detectives, delays in the critical first hours, and at one point up to 600 persons of interest. The detective who later took over the case says the NT police force wasn't equipped for the overwhelming scale of the investigation.
When something like this occurs, you have to have your response over the first 24 hours is so critical. In the Falconio case, it wasn't well done at all, and it was many mistakes were made in those first 24 hours.
But despite the setbacks, Bradley John Murdoch was convicted of his murder and jailed for life. Nearly 20 years on, Peter Falconio's body is still missing and there's little hope of it ever being found.
Bradley Murdoch won't, he won't ever tell. He will take it with him.
In 2014, police did find the body of missing Darwin woman Carly Sinclair after a long investigation, police turning to undercover tactics to arrest her partner.
He had given
what I'd said was probably a very believable version of events, but there was just certain things that just didn't ring true to investigators, and there were certain bits that we were still concerned about.
Danny Deacon eventually found guilty of murdering the 35-year-old and burying her in Darwin's rural area in front of their son. He remains behind bars, serving a life sentence. But not all cases have been solved. The 2017 disappearance of Paddy Moriarty from the tiny town of Larrimah remains an enduring mystery.
I think he's been done in. I really do.
And some cases remain blights on the force's record, with the coroner criticising several investigations, including the death of an 8-year-old boy in the remote town of Borroloola, found in a creek with rocks in his pockets.
8-year-old Kay Raggett was found dead in a muddy waterhole near Borroloola almost 7 years ago. His family remember him as a happy boy.
Police had ruled the boy's death an accidental drowning. Evidence was destroyed before it was tested. The coroner later said crimes may have been committed.
Just destroy it just like that. How do they justify that? You know, that's taking away closure for us, you know, in trying to, you know, capture this person who done this, you know, terrible thing to our boy.
A public apology was issued to the little boy's family, and while changes were implemented by police, the coroner found similar mistakes were made 10 years later when Sasha Green died in Tennant Creek. And one of the most dramatic cases NT Police have ever had to deal with came last year when 4 people were killed during an alleged shooting in Darwin's CBD.
We have in excess of around 100 police who are involved at both those crime scenes.
Benjamin Glenn Hoffman will face trial next year, just one of many high-profile cases Northern Territory Police have investigated in the last 150 years. Melissa McKay, ABC News.
And tomorrow will be the first of our special reports focusing on the ongoing impacts of crime across the Territory.
It's scary. It's scary for me. I lock myself in the house. I hear the noise from behind me and I get scared. They're drunk, they scream, they yell and things like that. What can I do?
One car in a rural area to support us all. Is it enough? Is it enough, sir?
Reporter Amy Colbert will take a look at crime in Darwin and Palmerston and what police are doing to control the problem. The international exploits of an elite Territory cricketer have seen him recognised with a top honour at the NT Sports Award held in Darwin last night. Talented bowler Kane Richardson was named as the NT Sportsperson of the Year for putting the Territory on the national and world stage with his performances at the ICC One Day World Cup and in the Big Bash League. Up-and-coming soccer star young Matilda Shadeen Evans from Borroloola was named as the Junior Sportsperson of the Year, while Bo Delacruz took home the NT Masters Sportsperson of the Year for her success in touch football. A total of 15 awards were presented over the night. The Wallabies have recorded their second straight draw with Argentina, deadlocked at 16-all in Sydney last night. Fullback Reece Hodges' 80th minute attempt from long range came after skipper Michael Hooper closed what had been a 10-point lead to the Pumas late in the first half. Discipline was an issue for both sides, with Pumas lock Marcus Kremer and Hooper both sin-binned before the half-time for making dangerous contact with the head. Wallabies lock Lukan Salakaya-Lotto was also sent off in the 60th minute for a high tackle. It was a frustrating end to the first season under the new Wallabies coach.
Good men who have worked hard, who've come together well, but I guess, as I've said, we need to see that reflected in performance. And there's no lack of heart and no lack of effort, but we've got to be way more clinical.
The Wallabies finished the year with just 1 win and 3 draws from 6 matches across the Bledisloe Cup and Tri-Nation Series. In cricket, captain Aaron Finch will miss tonight's T20 match in Sydney after suffering a glute injury. Opening bowler Mitchell Starc has also withdrawn from the remainder of the series after an illness in the family. Fellow quick James Pattinson took 3 wickets on the opening day of the tour match between Australia A and a select Indian side in Sydney. After a poor start, the tourists fought their way back to 8 for 237, thanks to a century from Ajinkya Rahane. The fixture is being used by both sides to settle on final spots for the first test, which begins on December 17. And in basketball, the Southside Flyers have claimed Melbourne Derby honours over the Melbourne Boomers in Cairns, thanks to a dominant performance from Liz Cambage. In what shaped as a tight contest between two title contenders, the ladder leaders won every quarter, extending the final margin to 15 points to win 94 points to 79. Cambage starred with 35 points and 7 rebounds.
Cambage again on the rejection.
We're finally starting to click now. We didn't really have it together the last time we played them, so it just felt good to come out and play together.
In the other match of the day, competition battlers, the Bendigo Spirit, are still winless after losing by 8 points to the Sydney Uni Flames. It's the Flames' third win and gives them a chance of making the finals. For only the second time, humanity has successfully retrieved rocks from an asteroid in the wilds of space and returned them safely to Earth. The Japanese space capsule made a spectacular re-entry to the atmosphere over the South Australian outback and has been retrieved by scientists hoping to learn more about the formation of the solar system.
Soaring through the sky at supersonic speeds, the fireball lit up the Australian outback as spectators looked up in awe.
I thought it would be like a shooting star, but it was big and it was wonderful, and I'm so pleased we're here this morning.
Amazing. Probably won't see it again in our lives.
But it wasn't just Coober Pedy locals who set an early alarm for the 4 a.m. space landing.
So we came here 10 years ago for the Hayabusa 1, and we just kind of thought, why not come up again? It was a bit of a last-minute thing. I have my school formal today.
As the Japanese space capsule disappeared over the horizon, it parachuted safely into the Woomera test range. It took the aerial team over 2 hours to locate it, confirming that the 6-year-long mission had achieved a successful arrival.
I'm happy now, of course, but it's more like feeling really relieved, I think we now have lived up to the expectation of all my friends all over the world.
We're just thrilled for the Japanese team and all of the work that's gone into this.
After undergoing a safety and biosecurity inspection, the capsule will be flown from Mission Control at Woomera directly to Japan, where it will be opened early next week. Even though it's a small capsule carrying just 1 gram of space dust, it has giant potential to help unlock the secrets of life on Earth. Sarah Mullins, ABC News, Woomera.
Now to the weather, and tonight's photograph is rainbow storm cell captured by Veronica Jane Thorpe. Showers and thunderstorms about the top end today and across the southern districts. It was hot to very hot and mostly sunny elsewhere in the territory. 33 in Darwin today, 32 in Bachelor. Katherine topped 38. 33 in Nhulunbuy and Borroloola up to 41. A cooler change saw daytime temperatures drop in the south by about 10 degrees. Alice Springs reached 31, 32 in Yulara and Tennant Creek 42. And in the 24 hours to 9 a.m, 29 millimetres of rain fell over Middle Point, 28 at Bachelor Airport, and rain to 3 p.m, 39 millimetres at Mount Bundy North, 37 at Bradshaw. Around Australia, 25 in Perth, 33 in Brisbane, Sydney 31. On the satellite, scattered thunderstorms extend across western and northern top end, northern WA, central Australia and southern Queensland. A trough extends from central WA across central Australia and into New South Wales, and a ridge is extending along southern Australia with another weak ridge over the Queensland coast. Interstate tomorrow, rain in Melbourne and Hobart, a sunny 30 in Sydney. To our north, possible thunderstorms in Port Moresby, rain in Dili and Singapore, overcast in Manila. And around the territory tomorrow, possible thunderstorms in Alice Springs, 27, Yulara 32, 37 in Tennant Creek, Katherine 38, Maningrida 33, a top of 34 in Nhulunbuy. And looking wet in the west, 35 in Jabiru. It's heading for a top of 33 in Darwin tomorrow. The morning high tide will be about 9:30. Seas off Darwin are up to 1 metre, and the sun will rise about 6:10. Looking ahead, showers and thunderstorms continuing during the afternoon or overnight, ahead of drier conditions midweek. In Alice Springs, cooler southeasterly winds continuing for much of this week. A nearby trough will cause showers and possible storms before a return to mostly sunny conditions on Tuesday. And to stay up to date with the latest news from the Territory, head to our website news.abc.net.au and set your location as the Northern Territory. And that's ABC News for this Sunday night. Thanks for your company. Good night.
Next on ABC.